Riding off the high of the incredibly popular, with fans at least, Environments 4, an album of new material for the first time in many a year, the Future Sound of London continued in 2012 with the 7th volume they're from the Archives series. Meanwhile, the Amorphous Androgynous project was in the spotlight more than ever with the release of the first material from the Noel Gallagher sessions. Welcome back to Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London, and this week we are looking at the second half of 2012. We start with the future sound of London, FSOLDigital Sampler 2, The Fears and Fantasies of the Unconscious Mind. If you're not sure what to buy, try this. This mix gives you a flavour of everything that lies within the shop. It celebrates music past, present and future on the FSOLDigital platform, from the last 5 years to the next set of releases. Some you will have heard before, some are still to be released, and some may inspire you to search further. FSOL, The Amorphous Androgynous, Yage, Part Submerged, Second Thought, Seafar, Z-Box, Neotropic, blended and melded into a 2-hour sonic soup, all ready to be consumed. More than 4 years after the FSOLDigital mix was released with Freeze magazine, a second compilation came along to FSOLDigital. Somewhere between an Illectrik brainstorm, a sampler and a preview of forthcoming releases, it's quite the oddity and hard to categorise. It's available in the pod room on FSOLDigital, but as it's generally a sampler and promotional mix, I kind of consider it to be a release rather than a conventional transmission. That said, I'll be looking at it more along the lines of their mixes. Most of the unreleased material has now been released, much of it under a different name to how it was listed in the artwork. The cover photo is the first appearance of a shot by Brian's brother Alan, who does photography under the name Future Sight.
I've always felt the stories that fascinate us the most are those that break through the defenses of the conscious mind and strike directly at the fears and fantasies of the unconscious.
A sample from WSH, a BBC film soundtracked by FSOL in the 90s, opens the mix and gives it its title. Then there's an extended version of The Wheel of Life taken from the Prime World soundtrack, FSOL's contribution to which consists largely of variations of the piece. With additional vocals, more emphasis on the different elements, including more dulcimer zither melodies, it's even more epic than the album version. I wish there was a proper release of the band's part of the score, as this teaser here is exceptional. Then it's back in time for an alternate version of The Lovers, Love is the Lover, at this point recently reissued as part of the FSOLDigital edition of The Isness and the Otherness. On the tracklist it's simply labelled The Lovers. The first properly new material at the time comes in the form of Long Exposure, initially labelled simply with 6 asterisks and advertised as from Environments 5. After a flute and water environment and one of many uses of the you can purchase all that you're listening to from FSOLDigital.com soundbites, it's on to the first guest artist with Seafar's Red Bluff from Drift. Hitching a ride on the Cosmic Freeway and Cosmic Space music, idents come next, just in time for some Amorphous with 2008's Opus of the Black Sun, before a very bizarre swerve into the opposite end of things with Z-Box. The first completely unreleased piece is FSOL's Strange Glare, labelled as Environments 5. It's a brief piece with piano loop, vinyl crackle and creepy synth notes, very much on the hauntology end of things. That's another one of those I'd really love to see properly released one day. We get a snippet of the narrator from Illectrik Brainstorms 5 before the mix moves into more guest artists, with the stunning Horse Trainer from Neotropic's Prestatin EP and my own bar guest from Safanok. After some Yage, the mix starts to delve deep into more obscure releases from Six Oscillators and Remittance and Heads of Agreement, overlapping to form a wonderful blend of drone and percussion. After the intro to Meadows, there's a little more Environments 4, before High Tide on the Sea of Flesh, listed as being from the limited edition Abbey Road vinyl cut of the Isness. At this point, the Abbey Road version had only been released on CD, so this was confusion, although all would make sense 6 years down the line. FSOL time being as slow and ponderous as ever. It's worth noting at this point that these are all full tracks, unlike the first sampler mix. After an atmospheric environment, Humanoid's Fractured Legiat mix appears as Stack a Humanoid Broken Machine, followed by Globular, making this less of a follow-up to FSOLDigital mix and more of a replacement. It could easily focus on later releases, but the intention is clearly to cover the entire label catalogue. But this time, for the second unreleased piece, All Float by Superheads from the forthcoming Service for Seekers. It's hard to know exactly what to make of this, but it's a fast-paced krautrock style track that doesn't really sound like anything else in the FSOL catalogue at this point. The alias hasn't resurfaced since this release. Going back to 1997, Headstone Lane's Murder follows, before the first ever appearance of a translations track in the mix with Wooden Ships, a then unreleased EMS piano track, more Seafar and some environments too with Small Town, labelled as Small Towns. The first part fades away to silence. Part 2 opens with Vertical Pig from Into Minds, the proposed DVD of the 2009 Athens concert, another thing yet to be released. From the video footage around, this seems to be one of the pieces that's changed less for its live incarnation, although there are some different effects in there and some additional samples. What I'd give for a recording of that show. There's even ground noise. After a lengthy synth and birdsong environment, it's into Wookiee, and then another comparatively obscure choice with parts submerged. Up next is Halloy Slope, listed here as Desquamation and listed as being taken from the Environments series, whatever that means. Up next is Riders on the Circadian Rhythm in a very different mix to the album version with added synth melodies making it sound even more FSOL-like than ever. A Yage track from the Woodlands of Old Outtakes, clearly never to be released and thus kind of pointless on a sampler, follows, and is a fast breaksy piece with strings and electric guitar feedback. A lot of fun. The Field Recorders with Thunder Overwellers from Captured is unlikely to represent any real release, being a recording of a thunderstorm at Paul Weller's studio. Odd that it was included when many lengthy environments go unmentioned. Then it's Lizard Crawl for something like the 1000th time at this point. They clearly love the track. The Yage remix of Neotropic's Home follows, albeit with the remix uncredited, and then the second Superheads track, Tender Locomotive. This would go on to be released as Locomotive by Black Hill Transmitter, potentially putting the Superheads project to bed in the process. There follows a creepy synth environment that lasts so long I've actually added it to the track list, before Long Shadows and North Arctic return to familiar FSOL territory. Then it's another exclusive from Yage, Pygmy, listed as being from the forthcoming Pygmy release. 8 years later, Pygmy came out with a totally different track using this title. It's typical Yage fare. At this point, many tracks are simply linked by applause samples. Hydro Medusa is included as a preview and announcement of the forthcoming From the Archives Volume 7 in much longer form than its released version. Following another extremely long environment that I've listed is Tokyo Travel, listed as Tokyo Traveller, then exchanged still under its original working title of Tudor Oak, as a gentle reminder that yes, they are going to release this fan favourite eventually. There's a final exclusive, Bringer from The Bringers, apparently from their album One Foul Swoop, a brief slice of instrumental psych rock, and then the mix closes on Mr. Sponge's Groovy Oscillations of all things. As with the bulk of the Amorphous material hit here, it's a slightly different mix to the album version. To be honest, it's probably not a mix you'll find yourself listening to that often. With its general lack of focus or atmosphere, it definitely feels like what it is, a sampler. That said, the 5 exclusives, numerous alternate takes and a bunch of otherwise unheard environments mean that there's enough material to justify having a copy, and it's actually quite a fun thing to pop on once in a while, the way you might stick a playlist on shuffle. As a sampler, it does an incredibly good job at representing pretty much everything on offer, as well as things that aren't on offer. The Future Sound of London From the Archives, Volume 7. Release date 19th of November 2012. Although only revealed a few months prior to release via the fears and fantasies of the unconscious mind, it's fair to say at this point that a 7th From the Archives album was pretty much expected. The first official announcement came a month before release in late October with the reveal of a video for Walls of Thought. Remarkably, it was revealed to be the band's first collaboration with Riz Maslin from 1991, believed to be lost but recently recovered. There are 3 special things about From the Archives 7. First is the amount of unheard material, only 2 tracks here were heard before release. The second is the amount of new material, the piano on the opening track and Earth's Twin are known to be newer recordings, with the possibility that other material is also from the 21st century. The third is the flow of the album. Indeed, were it not for the two known tracks, War Machines in particular, it could very easily pass for a newly recorded album with no questions asked. It has a distinct theme throughout, with a rough breakbeaty sound and a desert-like imagery suggested. There's actually such a similarity between the mood of the tracks that to this day I can never remember exactly which is which, although that might also be due to FSOL fatigue with the barrage of FSOLDigital era releases. Shortly after the Walls of Thought video was uploaded, videos for Shifting Sands, Outer Heaven and Many Moons Away were also added. The album was eventually made available for pre-order on FSOLDigital with 2 bonus tracks exclusive to the store as a download of the album, Hydro Medusa and Abandoned Housing Blocks of Pripyat. The FSOLDigital description is nicely evocative. The 7th volume from the Archive series of releases. Over 25 years of recordings, boxes and boxes of tapes, CDs and multitracks. Slowly the FSOL archives unfold. Each track numbered, titled and documented, ready for re/deconstruction. With both digital and physical editions released simultaneously, it was the first From the Archives album to not receive a cover update after the initial release. The initial response to the cover came in the form of the Vit balding joke on the FSOL board, although it was later revealed the cover star is not actually an ageing Vit. The unidentified man is seen next to Spiky, although both are largely obscured by a horizontal flash of light. The band name is in all caps once more. The booklet includes a range of photography. The first 2 pages feature a shot of a seashore overlaid with a cow walking through the desert on one page and a derelict building on the other. The middle spread has Shawneen and Spiky with various colours of lights and the usual FSOLDigital splatter effects. There's a photo of an underpass, a shot of Shawneen and Vit, as previously seen on the From the Archives Volume 6 cover, and an image of Spiky at the seaside. Yes, I really did just say that. Shifting Sands, Walls of Thought and Heat Distortions are all mentioned in the booklet, with 2 flow and damaged light emblems and EBV FSOLDigital exploding head logos. The disc art is much the same as the previous volume, and the spiky wireframe aligned left. The back cover is the final appearance of the early FSOLDigital back cover layout, with the Shawneen photo from the first 4 archive albums returning one last time. The spine is in conventional Euro style, unlike the rest of the text. The credits state the music was mixed and enhanced at Brian's studio with thanks to Dan Pemberton and Mikey Rowe, suggesting both musicians supplied new parts on the album. With Environments 4 being pretty much all new material, it seems the From the Archives series begins to take on its mantle as enhanced archives at this point. Interestingly, there's no artwork credit on the album, although it's clearly Buggy's work. It's hard to deny that the album is a leap up in quality for the From the Archives series. Its place as the best archive yet was pretty much unanimous on the FSOL board, and it has remained so for many fans since. I genuinely see it regarded as the best of the series to this date. With its distinct atmosphere, enhanced older recordings, at least one newer piece, and almost nothing in the way of familiar material, it's the point at which the archives stop being simply collections of older, often familiar works, and start feeling like standalone albums in their own right. It does pose the question of why bother even labelling them as archives at this point if they're similar in content to the earlier environments, but then FSOL move in mysterious ways. It also marks the end of 2012, and the end of my favourite period as an FSOL fan. The period of 4 years from the first Illectrik brainstorm and the feeling of FSOL being seen as a genuine ongoing concern again, to the might as well be a new album of Environments 4 and the From the Archives are also new albums of 2012 was a time of immense growth for FSOL. Tentative steps from semi-obscurity to a proper return, and the regular but evenly spaced releases and transmissions, each building on the previous, was incredibly satisfying. From this point on, things get a bit more confusing. Lost in the mists of time. The opening synth growl is reused from the 1993 Curve remix. This is quickly joined by laser reverse synths, before fading out to be replaced by piano, cello and other strings and timpani. The 93 sounds return again near the end. Undoubtedly one of the enhanced tracks on the album, the modern classical approach suggests much of it was recorded in 2012 with the help of Dan Pemberton. It works brilliantly as a brief album introduction, immediately setting the record out as one with an intentional structure, rather than simply a random collection of offcuts. Temples. The first in a run of dry, deserty, slow breakbeat tracks, Temples features gentle beats, a moody bass guitar line, atmospheric synth pads and, as always, vocal samples. As with most of From the Archives Vol 7, it's pretty difficult to work out the era of the track, which could have been recorded any time between 93 or 97, or potentially even in the 2010s. The final minute veers into more overtly electronic territory with a lively synth sequence. Outer Heaven. Opening with an environment of electronic bleeps, Outer Heaven quickly moves into a shuffling jazz drum loop, distorted synth notes and analogue sweeps. After a minute, a lead melody comes in the form of female vocal samples, as ever, giving the piece a somewhat exotic, possibly Eastern feel. The vocals cut out for a brief period, led by piano notes, before returning for the second half. The track moves into a false ending before the beat comes back with a brighter piano melody, possibly a new recording by Dan Pemberton. Outer Heaven continues the deserty mood set out on the previous track. As with most of the album, there are no easily suggestible elements hinting at a particular era, although the gurgling synth sweep suggests it probably is a 93 or 94 recording. It will go on to be released in 2 subtly remixed forms over the coming years. Many Moons Away. Opening with 40 seconds of gurgling noises and synth drones, Many Moons Away gradually begins to build up around 1 minute 20 with sharp string notes and sampled guitar arpeggios, over which there are layers of analogue synths with all manner of sweeps, gurgles and squelches. It isn't until the final minute that the beat fully kicks in, with a fairly gentle break. A new synth melody comes in at this point, but the focus is still on the layers of odd noises. A genuinely strange piece of music, wonderfully fractured and abstract, while being easily accessible at the same time, and in keeping with the style and mood of the previous pieces. Shifting Sands. More deserty sounds here, with a loose rolling breakbeat, a hypnotic church bell sample. After the opening synth string chords cut out, a brief flute melody comes in. The second half features a string instrument melody, an oud or similar, giving the piece a particularly Middle Eastern feel. Indeed, with more live-sounding drums, it could pass for a Woodlands of Old track. Things gradually wind down over the final minute, with different elements being removed over the period of around 90 seconds. Walls of Thought. The first track used to promote the album via YouTube. When the pre-order went up, fans were surprised to discover the origins of the track. Originally recorded in 1991 with Riz Maslin on vocals, only to be lost shortly afterwards because the multitracks were buried under a pile of equipment in a box in a storeroom, to resurface 21 years later. The cavernous drum sounds in the background in fact come from the outer environment to It's Not My Problem, audibly confirming this, but the overall style is not what one might expect from an Accelerator era track. That the band were working on such overtly ambient music so early on is remarkable. Over the doom-laden backing atmospherics, Riz sings wordlessly in a very Lisa Gerrard type way. Indeed, the band's Dead Can Dance influence is all over the track. It wouldn't have fit on Accelerator at all, but matches the mood of From the Archives Volume 7's opening 5 tracks perfectly. A beautiful, haunting piece that's testament to the band's diversity. War Machines. One of only 2 previously heard tracks on From the Archives 7, an alternate take of War Machines featured regularly on the Dead Cities tour and was even released on the ISDN show CD under the name Tingler 96, the title giving away the source of the Hoover synth samples. Even without the live performance, the track's origin is pretty clear. The dark percussive environment linking antique toy and quagmire runs throughout. Over the top is a slow, fairly simplistic beat, more so than usual for Dead Cities, with a double-speed cymbal line. The Hoover stabs come in regularly throughout, punctuating the otherwise repetitive piece. It is a hugely atmospheric track, it being no surprise that the background was reutilised as an environment. However, the Dead Cities sound does make it deviate slightly from the mood of the rest of the album. Flygon. Flygon was initially heard on Electric Brainstorm 7, where it was listed as a track from Environments 4, an album it would have been very much at home on. Dark synth chords play in line with a lot of the album's mood, while live-sounding drums gradually fade in over the course of a minute, reaching a crescendo with bigger synths. It's in and out in a short space of time, but leaves a lasting impression. While the origin of the track is unknown, its potential for inclusion on Environments 4 suggests it's probably a 2010-2011 recording. Earth's Twin. Earth's Twin begins with a brief environment of insect calls and water, after which there's a sad-sounding synth and a mellow drum machine. A fairly new recording, probably from the Environments 3 sessions. It had a working title of Sunken Ships before that name was reappropriated for the more suitably murky Environments 3 track. It's a very gentle piece with acoustic guitar arpeggios and gentle beats, synth pads coming and going throughout. It's fairly simplistic with not much development, but creates a pleasant mood. The final minute is given over to a closing environment with synth drones and numerous field recordings and samples. Switzerland. Switzerland was one of a few tracks to leak several years before release in a much longer version than this particular mix. The edit here is actually not too bad, as it's a reasonably repetitive track and little is lost. With its early 90s sounding synth chords and jazzy guitar samples, it's a long way from the piece it eventually developed into, Antique Toy. The two tracks share the same beat, although Switzerland is much brighter with numerous gurgling samples and sounds and an upbeat melody. Clearly not suitable for the atmosphere of Dead Cities, it's no surprise it became a very different track. The last minute is an environment with clicking sounds, synth oscillations and a looped sample of someone saying alright. Must be mistaken. With a blend of drum machine line and sampled ride cymbals, pleasingly panned hard right and left, and a bass guitar melody, Must Be Mistaken returns to the desert vibe of From the Archive 7's first half. An atmospherically ambiguous melody comes and goes a number of times in the first couple of minutes before a piano fades in to bring a warmer, more uplifting feel to the track. A wonderfully chilled piece, it also connects with the first half of the album by not containing any easily identifiable sounds, potentially coming from just about any year from 93 onwards. At the end it crossfades into the synth drone of the following track, over which a spoken sample says "That's real." Old Train. A brilliantly titled piece, Old Train's clunky beats and growling synth stabs are very much reminiscent of an old American steam locomotive chugging through the desert, nearly falling apart but holding together just enough to continue a 1,000-mile journey through the wilds. Opening and closing on a major key synth drone, the piece moves into darker territory in the middle with some ominous samples thrown in. Once again, it's pretty much impossible to identify a potential recording year, and once again it just fits brilliantly with most of the surrounding tracks. Heat Distortions. Another piece with a wonderfully evocative title, the pulsing, compressed synths here bring to mind sweltering heat causing haze. Although less breakbeaty than much of the album, with clattering IDM drum machines and an uplifting synth melody, the atmosphere continues with the desert theme. It sadly finishes around the 2-minute mark, leaving the listener wanting much more. The complexity of the beats suggests it's probably a Dead Cities outtake, but you never know. Exchanged, also known as Tudor Oak and Tudor Oak Manor Farm.
Alright, let's get the fuck out of here.
Bit rude. The very, very long-awaited Tudor Oak finally gets released under new name Exchanged. First heard in its only known live performance on the 1997 Peel session, the proto-Isness track with its murky beats, growling synth lead and punchy organ samples had become a fan favourite from the word go, but was sadly missed off the 1997 Heavy From the Archives 5. After appearing on Electric Brainstorms Volume 2, and later The Fears and Fantasies of the Unconscious Mind, it was clear the track wasn't forgotten, and it eventually found release in late 2012. As with most of the 1997 material, I'm not sure exactly how much of it is the quality of the material and how much is the novelty of piecing together this potential 5th FSOL album, but I absolutely love Exchanged and really wish we'd got that Psychedelic FSOL record in 1998. A 30-second environment of birdsong closes the track, the album, and the year. Hydro Medusa. Initially promised as an Archive 7 track on Fears and Fantasies of the Unconscious Mind, but later consigned to a digital bonus track when buying the album from FSOLDigital, Hydro Medusa is a genuine curio, one of the very last tracks recorded at Earthbeat in either late 97 or early 98. It's a heavy-hitting, super-fast breaks piece, initially overlaying the beats with sitar notes and birdsong, before moving into much darker territory at the halfway point with heavy beat glitches and then huge minor key synth chords. Just when it sounds ready to explode into a climax, the track fades away into a bubbling synth environment and is done. Sadly way too short. Abandoned Housing Blocks of Pripyat. An outtake from the We Have Explosive single sessions, Abandoned Housing Blocks of Pripyat takes that track's buzzing synth and applies it to slow bouncy breaks, dark synth chords, jazzy bass and synth notes, and an ominous 2-note synth melody. Originally released as a bonus track for FSOLDigital purchasers of From the Archives Vol 7, the track features an extensive outro environment of a long reverberating drone before bubbling synths and light percussion, which speed up into the outro. Later reissues on Life in Moments and We Have Explosive 2021 issue the outro environment. The Life in Moments version begins with a sample of someone saying Take 35, while on We Have Explosive it starts with ascending digital tones first heard on mid-97 transmissions. 2012 remixes, compilation tracks and production work. In 2012, the Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble remixes went from strength to strength with a further 2 released, Result of the year, we first heard the very first production work of another artist from Brian and Gaz with Noel Gallagher, and the first FSOL compilation exclusive track in 16 years were released, one as part of the same game series as the last exclusives, and the other being the most obscure release in the band's history. The future sound of London, we have Explosive 2011 Rebuild. Rebuilt in 2011 and released in 2012, this remix was initially believed to have been put together by the band, but later turned out to be created by Alistair Lindsay, who records music under the name Switch Shift, effectively just making it a Switch Shift remix. As there's been no soundtrack release for Wipeout 2048, the game the track appeared on, it can only be legally heard on the game itself, although a ripped version has circulated online since about the time of the game's release. It's a pretty solid modern breaks take on the original, with the vocals and buzzing synth lines being present, but also the guitar stabs, arpeggios, closing reverse sounds and numerous other samples appearing frequently throughout, meaning it's a very well developed track that doesn't feel like a simple lazy cash-in mix. It's very much not in the usual FSOL ballpark, but if the style is your kind of thing then it's definitely worth tracking down. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, Shoot a Hole into the Sun. Following the split of Oasis and the popular Amorphous remix of their last ever single, Falling Down, Noel went solo and decided to invite Gaz and Brian to produce his first album. There are so many versions of this story, mostly from Noel, famous, and probably exaggerated, stories of him being bemused by Gaz's directions on how to play guitar, and being told he's not allowed to talk to Brian, being my favourite parts, but a few from Gaz which he claims have been largely misinterpreted by the media. Of course, the press have their own agenda when publishing interviews, so it's perhaps no surprise. In short, when Noel held a press conference in 2011 announcing a fairly straightforward solo album to be followed by a space jazz collaboration with the Amorphous Androgynous, Brian and Gaz were taken somewhat by surprise. They were unaware these songs had even been recorded twice. And perhaps unsurprisingly, there was a lot of hype around the Amorphous sessions, with Gallagher claiming all sorts of things, including regular comparisons with Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Somewhat worried about those remarks, Gaz claims the sessions were largely a lot more conventional than the band's extended remixes, and this isn't surprising given their ability to come up with relatively straightforward psych pop in the form of Mellow Hippo, Peppermint Tree, High and Dry. They decided to go ahead and do a second version of If I Had a Gun with a spacier, more Floyd-esque sound, and so Shoot a Hole into the Sun was born. By far the most experimental thing Gallagher has released without a remix credit tacked onto the end. Although his X-Files soundtrack contribution always surprises people, the 8-minute Shoot a Hole into the Sun definitely succeeds in its aims, taking the original song and warping it beyond recognition. Indeed, the lyrics are the only things that remain from If I Had a Gun, with one line, If I Had a Gun and Shoot a Hole into the Sun, forming the bulk of the track. Otherwise, it's very much an Amorphous affair, with proggy Hammond organ chords, space guitar from Noel, mid-tempo live drums, violin licks and layered voices. Gaz can be heard on backing vocals, and there are other backing vocalists in the second half, one sounding like Alicia Sufit. Disappointingly, no musicians are credited on the sleeve, so it's hard to say for certain. We don't know how many of these musicians were part of Noel's High Flying Birds live band, how many of them were members of the Amorphous collective. There's a wonderful atmospheric breakdown in the middle with slide guitar and some additional lyrics, Let Me Fly into the Mood, Because You're the Only God I Would Ever Need, before the full band come back in for a rockier climax with harpsichord chords added near the end. The amount of original material from Amorphous resulted in Brian and Gaz being credited as co-writers. Your enjoyment of the track will obviously depend on your tolerance of Noel Gallagher. As a childhood Oasis fan, my tolerance level is reasonably high, and I do think it's a very good track. While apparently not actually a great example of the feel of the album itself, it does give an idea of how far Noel was willing to expand his sound. The track was released as a B-side to Dream On, the fourth single from the debut High Flying Birds album, and later included on the B-sides collection, Songs from the Great White North, and a box set of singles. Despite receiving largely very positive responses from the press and both Oasis and Amorphous fans, it remains the only track from the 2011 sessions to be released to date. I could speculate on that for a long time, but you know what, it's really not worth it. DJ Food featuring Natural Self, the Illectrik Hoax, a monstrous psychedelic bubble mix by the Amorphous Androgynous. Also known as DJ Food featuring Natural Self, the Illectrik Hoax, the Amorphous Androgynous remix, DJ Food and the Amorphous Androgynous, Don't Pray Don't Bother, We're Evil, DJ Food and the Amorphous Androgynous featuring Natural Self, the Illectrik Images, In My Mind, Never Die. That's 3 separate tracks, or a single long piece. Just arrived, fresh from the Amorphous Androgynous, aka Future Sound of London, is a frankly mind-melting 17-minute remix of the Illectrik Hoax, a track from the album, featuring Natural Self on vocals. This has been in the pipeline for a while, and they initially started work on a version of Giant, but changed direction, and so a 3-part Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble remix of the Hoax has been born. To say that they've thrown everything into it is an understatement. After a manic version of the original, they proceed to tear it apart and reassemble fragments of it into 2 new versions. So I read a blog entry from DJ Food in January 2012. The Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble remix was becoming very much in demand at this point. DJ Food had invited Amorphous onto his Solid Steel show, which will be broadcast a couple of days before the remix's release on Record Store Day, and has been a friend and occasional collaborator ever since, frequently providing news updates about the band on his own blog, and even occasionally providing artwork. I wasn't sure how to structure this. The remix is, as with past mixes, in several parts, but has been released in both multi-part format with individual titles, and as a single 17-minute track. Eventually I went ahead and popped it all together, makes for less work if nothing else. The first part is a basic remix, pretty much what you'd expect. Breakbeats, lots of guitar solos, Hammond organ, flute, harmonica, Natural Self's vocals slightly buried in the mix. The kitchen sink is once more referenced. Don't Pray, Don't Bother, We're Evil is an enjoyably demented title that doesn't immediately feel particularly Amorphous-y, although the track picks up pretty much where the first left off with a chopped up and looped guitar line, a slower beat but the same amount of instrumental freak-out splashed all over the place. A guitar and electronics environment closes this section on a mellow note, with a quick synth suite from the Mellow Hibbo Disco Show even making a brief appearance. The electric images in My Mind Never Die is probably the real draw here, accounting for more than half of the full remix and being the part that received quite a bit of radio play. For this final part, a lot of the excessive instrumentation is stripped back into a more conventional danceable piece. Natural Self's vocals are front and centre here, with the flutes and Hammond organs floating around in the background. With its incessant breakbeat, it's actually the closest the band have come to dance music since We Have Explosive and its remixes 15 years before, which is all kinds of ironic. It cuts back into a 2-minute breakdown, and once you think it's over, the beat comes back once more with added synths. A cut-down version appears as the A-side of the digital download, and promo CD editions as a radio edit. Mikey Rowe is once again in the Amorphous fold, playing Hammond, with live members Ed Keane and Anthony Argyros adding their own touches. What's most interesting in the credits is the appearance of Brian on electric guitar, drums and piano. The guy believed to be the more electronic focus of the two, this came as quite a surprise to many at the time. After taking on production duties with Noel Gallagher, it seems that from 2012, Amorphous is officially a production duo as well as the band being produced. This is the first 21st century Amorphous track not to feature Produced by the Future Sound of London in its credits. After the Record Store Day 12-inch release, the mix was released digitally as a single track, with a promo CD flying around too. Further copies of the 12-inch were pressed due to high demand, and more were included in the Search Engine box set released on the following year's Record Store Day. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, aka What a Life, the Amorphous Androgynous remix. The second Noel and Amorphous collaboration, released as the B-side to the 5th and final single from Noel's debut album. One wonders whether it was remixed from the Amorphous sessions of the track or the Dave Sardy version. Probably the latter if the credits are to be believed. The mix opens with big, bold synth chords, after which the original's piano comes in, and then disco beat? Continuing in the vein of the DJ Food remix, the Amorphous sound continues moving into dance floor friendly territory, and in one of the least expected moves, is probably more overtly electronic sounding than environments for the FSOL album released in the same year. Synth arpeggios, string samples, the track is pretty much in space disco territory. Though not technically a Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble remix, by name at least, it follows the structure of the past mixes by being in several parts over the course of 15 plus minutes. After the main section, it breaks down to layers of synths and guitar distortion with gurgling electronics and very FSOL sounding textures. Guitars are fed through numerous effects before a breakbeat comes in to lead the second part into more danceable territory once more. After spending several years moving the Amorphous sound from its more electronic beginnings into a live band, it's remarkable to hear them shifting the sound so radically towards electronics once more here. The middle section in particular could very easily pass for an FSOL track, the breaks going through all sorts of filters and modulation. Female vocals singing the title become more prominent as the piece reaches the climax, breaking down into silence. And then Noel's vocals come back in, chopped and looped over layers of ambient guitar sounds, and then it's back into electronic territory with more synth arpeggios and some gorgeous shimmering FM synth notes. And while this final vocal reprise section features bongos and other more overtly live sounds, the synths still feature heavily. No additional musicians are credited on the sleeve, once more, with the female vocalist, Alicia Sufit, probably, a key part of the remix. Gaz's studio seems to have changed name from the Witch's Coven to the slightly more worldly The Cowshed. Maybe it's just because I do like the original song quite a bit, but this is my favourite Amorphous remix since the Oasis one 3 years before. Noel's minor key rockers do suit the Amorphous production sound pretty well, and the increased use of electronics here make the track really stand out in the Amorphous canon. The future sound of London, Ocudate. This one is so obscure that people weren't aware of it until many years after its release. In fact, the actual release means ridiculously hard to find out about in the slightest. Discogs has this to say: box set compiled by Frode Heron as a testament of his love for his girlfriend Mimi and music. All artists were asked to contribute unreleased tracks free of charge to this box set. The box set was given to Mimi at Rust, Copenhagen on the 8th of December 2012, with only Frode, Mimi and Peter Hook of New Order present. Everything about this seems strange. 68 tracks provided by professional musicians, given away for free for a stranger's wedding gift, presented with Peter Hook of New Order and Joy Division as the only witness. 125 copies as CDR sets released in 4 versions, one of which, the FSOL version, also includes Ocudate as a single-sided 5-inch lathe cut, limited to 5 copies, given away to guests and other friends. It's absolutely baffling. Amusingly, the track is incredibly minimal and one for the hardiest of collectors only. 79 seconds of seemingly random synth bleeps. Sounds more like a polemical experiment than an FSOL track. After a few years of silence, the library music releases continued in 2012, with work for the Universal Music Library, working with Mikey Rowe, to remix tracks originally by Andrew Britton and David Goldsmith. This is blues rock remixed into breakbeats for the most part, released under the name Live in the Studio Remixed. There are 2 versions of Corrupted Souls on it, atmospheric synths and slow reverberated drum loops on the first. The alternative version is a more lively, upbeat version with Hammond organ. The other pieces are very much in Amorphous-y kind of territory and only for the hardcore fan. FSOLDigital releases. First up, Beacon Tour soundtrack by me, under my birth name, Ross Baker, which I no longer go by, so that's always a bit awkward. But there we go. In 2012, Brian asked me if I wanted to release something else on FSOLDigital. At the time, I was working on a film score for a friend, so sent over a selection of pieces that were, at the time, expected to be included on the film. The film itself was never released. It's a bunch of lo-fi acoustic music for the most part, with a couple of modern classical tinge pieces. Amusingly, a piece actually samples a polemical track in the only time I've sampled anything FSOL related. Various Neck of the Woods. A compilation of sound works and field recordings, including a piece by Riz Maslin. This was released as both a CD and digital. The CD was originally released by Kateri Collective, and copies were purchased by the band to sell through FSOLDigital.com. Daniel Pemberton, Space Dive. Dan Pemberton's soundtrack to the BBC and National Geographic documentary Space Dive, with purchases including a bonus 4-track EP of ambient pieces called Silent Sky. It's all very epic soundtrack sounding stuff really, big string melodies, occasional electronic percussion and so on. And with that we have reached the end of 2012. Leave me a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on the music. This is a great year for me, the archive and environments from this year, particular highlights, as well as some of the production and remix work. They're also like, subscribe, you know all the buttons by now. And I'll be back next week with a video covering 2013. I hope you join me then.